Oh, hello everybody. Welcome to today's fourth and last lesson of our SpecFlow BDD masterclass. Today it's all maintaining your BDD solution. Again, Kasper is with us today. So let's start. It's a packed session as yesterday. Quick the guidelines as a short reminder. Use the Q&A tool. Do upvoting of the question. We have the dedicated Q&A part like yesterday and the days before. Don't use the chat. There will be a quiz. And if you are also participating, I have already been participating the threes before, you will be the chance to win an Amazon voucher. And then quickly our usual poll that we know what the audience is today.
But I guess we have some good guesses what the answers will be, but let's see, you never know.
we small spoiler, but we still have product owner and business analysts here in this session.
I'm really happy about that. I
Yes.
have been, there were some projects where I have been working as product owner, and I realized that they are really having a hard job. So it's not easy at all because I mean, if you are in the technical part, then you only need to focus on the technology or whatever, the solution, let's say it like that. But being a product owner is like two sides, dealing with the two sides.
Oh yes,
That's really hard.
Good. The industry changed a little bit since yesterday, but the rest is the same.
Yeah, the world is changing. Very good.
Good.
So
with that, Kasper, your stage.
And now I have to be able to share my screen, and then hopefully I did that now.
Works.
Again, all of my windows have rearranged. Come on, everything should get back into its normal place. Very good. So thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It really feels a little bit like Friday, isn't it, on this? So that after the fourth day, probably you also feel the same. But I hope that that with this masterclass concept, you at least got some good input for working with SpecFlow and BDD, or just learning into SpecFlow and BDD. That's what we designed the masterclass for. Majority of you were here yesterday. Just I think 3 people are new for today. So basically today we are going to have a presentation, a longer presentation than usual. However, we have an extended Q&A. I mean, how much extended is depending on how I am able to manage my time. And again, if you are interested in instructoral or even in-house SpecFlow and BDD courses, or even Cucumber courses, then check out my website. That's what I'm doing when I'm not with you on a masterclass. So just like earlier, because this is a masterclass, you might hear something that that you are surprised or not necessarily agreeing with. Happy to talk about that. Feel free to reach out in the Q&A or after that in an email. So for example, if I say, don't call step definitions from each other, and if you don't agree with that, then we can start to have a discussion. But of course, it can happen then that the answer will be, and you know what comes, right? So that, let's see.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do.
Yeah, so for the last day, that's my creativity. That's it. So anyway, overview about the lessons that we have for the masterclass. So the first lesson on Monday We were seeing the process, how BDD spec flow process looks like, and then we went to the details of that. On the second day, we were looking at formulation, so basically how to write better BDD scenarios or how to write good BDD scenarios. It's a big topic. We were really packed there. And yesterday we have seen a couple of things about spec flow. Again, it's a huge topic, and there are many things to be mentioned there. But basically, we were going through the core concepts, and we were talking a little bit about how the application can be automated at different levels, and even more importantly, how we can structure our code base so that it's better maintainable, so that that you can make a more successful automation project out of that. And today, as I announced in many times when there were some questions, today we will try to look at those things that's about maintainability of the scenarios, maintainability of the code base, and seeing what kind of things you should consider if you have full scale bigger project with many scenarios. Because I think in a normal project, in a normal size project, having several hundreds of scenarios is absolutely not unusual. So that's definitely the size that you should target for. Okay. Again, yesterday we got a couple of questions unanswered. I was scanning them through. Hopefully, fortunately, some of them were referring to those things that we will talk about that today. But there was maybe one that it was even a recurring one, so it was coming up in different forms, in different questions that I wanted to address. This wasn't exactly the question, but these questions could be simplified into that. Okay, does SpecFlow support a particular automation tool? And you replace it with this XYZ with the name that you want to choose for. And first, I didn't answer the question, but we had a little bit discussion with Andy, and now I understand what causes the confusion. So let's make it clear. So SpecFlow itself is a generic purpose tool. It doesn't have any specific binding or any specific preference to any automation framework. So for SpecFlow, it doesn't matter whether you will automate your application with Selenium or with Playwright or with API testing or just calling methods. That doesn't matter for SpecFlow. SpecFlow is basically just giving you a frame, giving you the step definitions that, hey, this is a method, and fill it up as you wish. So that's what basically SpecFlow said. So from that perspective, the question doesn't really make sense, because I mean, SpecFlow supports anything, or at least anything that can be automated from .NET. And I think the confusion, or at least Andy highlighted that the confusion might be that we have started these SpecFlow actions. This is a separate repository even in GitHub. The SpecFlow actions thing, and the SpecFlow actions is basically containing some sample libraries or libraries to automate some commonly used automation targets. So I don't remember the full list, but probably we have a kind of a one for Selenium, one for Playwright, whatever. So for all these. And of course, it can happen that your tool is not not listed there, or maybe your tool has the version of the tool that you want to use is not the version that code is using. But these are just samples. So, I mean, you can use them as libraries as well, but I would even more consider to use them as sample infrastructural components that you can better reuse. So if they don't support your tool, or if they don't support the version of your tool, feel free to fork the code, tweak it a little bit so that it supports. Typically those libraries are not a big bunch of code, so hopefully they are easier to upgrade to a newer version. And of course you can use it as it is, or you can even submit a pull request for us, and then others can also benefit from your changes. So but never wanted to have a full support for everything in the world. So the idea of the SpecFlow actions was just to provide some instant help for the really the most common scenarios, and provide an example for how you can make integration or support for your favorite tool based on that code. So use it as it is. Okay, so that's maybe one thing that that makes sense to mention. Otherwise, our story is the same demo application, the Spec Overflow application, and basically the today's agenda. I mean, it looks like it's short, but actually it will be again pretty much packed. So again, after a very quick summary, the first topic will be about, I was calling it daily practices, so that what kind of routines, what kind of things you need to do if you would like to keep maintaining an existing SpecFlow solution. And on this part, I will particularly focus on the automation code, on the step definitions, and what kind of things do you need to do to reflect those things. So that's what we will start with, and I think this will be a longer one, and I think the break will be just after that. And after the quiz and the break, we will see how we can manage the scenarios. So especially if you have a larger set of scenarios, hundreds of scenarios, what kind of ideas could be used to keep them in order and keep them in a nice structure. That's what we will do. And then we will have two other smaller sections. I will say a few notes about how to use SpecFlow in continuous integration, build servers, and we will talk a little bit about documentation and reporting as well, especially the living documentation aspect, how you can get a living documentation from the SpecFlow scenarios. And of course, we will also define what living documentation is. So that's the today's stuff. Again, today you are going to see some codes, or quite much code, but hopefully you can got that and get that and stay with us. Okay, so then let's get into that. As I said, I would like to start again with this overview summary. You have seen it now many days. So basically, BDD scenarios are making a connection, making a bridge between the requirements, which is somewhere is not necessarily reflected. It's not necessarily written down. It somewhere exists, but probably in the product owner's, business analyst, or the other stakeholders' imagination. But we would like to match that as much as possible. And on the other hand, we have the solution that we provide, which is a very concrete thing. It is implementing something, and we would like to make sure that these two things are matching each other. And scenarios are validating. They are making it clear that how the requirements are, and on the other hand, they can verify whether the application is really fulfilling those. And to be able to do that into practice, the suggested process, of course, you can always tweak that, was that to be able to do that, to be able to make these scenarios really sitting in the middle and not just in the technical space, you need to talk about the scenario, talk about the requirements, and try to imagine what are those cases, what are those scenarios, what are those examples, as we call them, that are really illustrating these pieces of requirements. And once you have these examples, we can say that they are lightweight form of a scenario, we can then, as a separate step, formulate them to scenarios and then automate them. That's what we showed or seen now in several days now. Again, our tool is SpecFlow. We said many things about that, and probably you will sense that that some of the numbers are sometimes reappearing in the quiz. Now, maybe I shouldn't say any number particularly, but maybe I should say that the numbers on the slide are important. So so that's our tool that we will do, and with that, basically, let's jump into that and let's go into the daily practices that is our first topic for today. And to do that, let me just bring back this diagram that I outlined yesterday. I hope that you remember when we were talking about this layering of the system, or layering of our automation solution, at the end, we, or at least I, were somehow suggesting or trying to convince people that it makes sense to have some layering in the automation solution. Otherwise, it's very easy to get into a chaos mode, and then the maintenance cost will be super high. And what I suggested there, and it's not my idea. This is a common pattern. So it's nothing that I invented or so, but definitely this is something that I have seen working in many cases. So that at least these three elements or three different aspects of the automation code should be separated. So in our case, if we consider the BDD scenarios, we have the specification, the requirements expressed in the form of the BDD scenario. So that's the input. Then we have a bunch of testing decision that we have to make, so that okay, this was the requirement, this was the expectation. How do we do that? What kind of actions do we need to do? In which order? With which parameters? With which defaults should we use these actions? That's the testing concern that is normally sitting in this step definition methods. Once we decided what we want to do, what kind of actions do we want to perform, and what kind of verifications we want to make, we can call into the deeper things below, which is in our case the automation concern. The automation concern is basically everything to know how to exercise, how to move that particular component of your system. And we have seen this driver pattern is a commonly used pattern for that. Basically, a driver is nothing else than a code base that is able to drive, it's able to automate a particular component of your system, or if you are doing UI automation, a particular page of your system. The page object pattern is basically the same thing for UI. And definitely, if you are doing more complex automation logic, then there is a bunch of infrastructural concern that you need to deal with. How to set up how to start the application, how to stop the application, how to start up the browser, stop the browser, all these things. Definitely these things needs to be extracted and separated from all the rest. Particularly the SpecFlow Actions library is providing you these infrastructural components, but in our sample application, it's all written in so that you can have a look at that and copy it even to your place. So these were the layers that we defined, and obviously on each layer we can have changes. So for example, if you think about the scenario, then the scenarios are changing if we have a new behavior, if we are revising or correcting the language, or if we find a specification bug, something that was even the test was wrong, and that's why the application was also wrong. So that's that are kind of the motivations where you need to change the scenario. The step definitions, so the testing layer, might also need to have some ongoing changes. Of course, as the product grows, we need to extend the testing capabilities. So therefore, we are making new step definitions. But sometimes we need to adapt to the language changes. So if we rephrased or revised the language of the scenarios, then we have to adapt those changes. And of course, we can always refactor and improve our testing code. And of course, we can also fix test bugs. On the driver layer, on the automation layer, obviously we can also have changes. It can happen that the application interface has changed. So the requirements haven't changed, the tests were not changing, but simply the application was changing. That's a typical situation, for example, for UI automation scenarios. If you are in the situation that the UI is changing, UI is always changing, and you need to change the automation code base in many different locations, then probably you haven't extracted properly the automation concern into a single place. Because if it's extracted to a single place, then it's enough to change it there. Anyway, so if the application interface changes, then obviously we need to change the drivers. But of course, we might also want to have refactoring, improving, or even fixing some automation-related bugs. And finally, obviously, the infrastructure can also change. We want to extend the capabilities of the infrastructure. Maybe now we want to support a new browser. It can happen that the environment is changing. Now we would like to provide headless browsers or something like that. And of course, we can also improve that code as well, or refactor fix some infrastructure related bugs. So these are basically the set of changes or set of motivations why the different layers are changed. And of course, sometimes they are changed together. So typically, for example, when you are adding a new behavior, adding a new scenario, then you have to extend the testing capabilities of the step definitions. If you are changing the language of the scenario or the phrasing of the scenario, obviously you need to adapt to those language changes in the step definitions. And so sometimes they are coming in, so they are not independent of each other. So now I have used this color coding. I mean, with colors probably I'm not the best, but anyway, so that there will be 3 different topics that I would like to show, and basically this will be the one where we are adding new behavior and extending the capabilities, and the other 2 as well. And again, like before, we will do that through code demonstration. And on the right down corner, you will always see what is the topic that we are currently addressing. So right now, I would like to start with seeing how do we work? What kind of things do we need to do if we are implementing a new behavior? And that means that we need to extend the testing capabilities of the automation code. So let's jump to the code. Again, this thing you have partially seen already, but here I would like to focus on a couple of other things that we haven't mentioned in the previous days. So right now, my application is at the stage where a new feature, this question suggestion feature, we were talking about that a lot, is currently being implemented. So we are at the stage that we have already defined the first scenarios. Actually, we have 2 scenarios here, but nothing else was done so far. So we don't have the automation. So our automation layer doesn't support these new things that we wanted to say here. And of course, the application is also not supporting these yet. So that's the stage that we want it to be, or that where we are right now. What I want to show, okay, is that if we run these scenarios right now, then since we haven't provided the automation, and you can see this from the coloring of these steps, as we haven't provided any automation for these, obviously these scenarios will not passing yet. Let me just run the scenarios in the meanwhile. So these scenarios will not be passing yet because we haven't even automated the thing. However, interestingly, they are also not failing because from the SpecFlow's perspective, they are in a special state. They are so-called undefined states where SpecFlow basically says that, hey, I see that you wanted to say something like that, but I don't know what you really wanted to mention about. That's how to automate these particular steps. So they are coming with this undefined state, which is if you would run that on the build server, they would be failing the build, because even though that they are somewhat skipped, basically they would be treated as a failure, which is not really a good thing, because we have defined already a scenario. This scenario is absolutely fine. We just haven't done it yet. But since a scenario, implementing a full scenario together with the code is a lengthy process, so I might need to check in this code even in this current stage. So it would normally fail the build, which is not good. I don't want to make this to fail the build. And to overcome that, I'm using this technique using this trick that I was also mentioning on Monday, that as you can see, I have this formulated tag on the scenario. And basically what I can do, that on the build server, I can exclude all the scenarios from the execution that have the formulated tag. So basically with the formulated tag, I say that, hey, it doesn't make sense to run this scenario yet because this is anyway unfinished. It's a in progress code. So don't run those particular scenarios. I mentioned on Monday that from the test execution, you could even copy out the class that that would be the good starting point. But I also mentioned that if you are using Visual Studio, then you can use the define steps command and basically just suggest that, okay, it looks like there are 2 new steps that should be defined. So it just lists me these 2 new steps. And it even suggests me that that maybe a good class name would be this question suggestion step definitions class. So typically here, people would just hit create and move on. But what I want to say, and this is what I would like to highlight, at least for the today's session, for that just because the tool is able to suggest you something, it's not necessarily something that you have to take. So before you are starting to automate a new concern, and before you start creating new step definition classes, probably the better thing would be to first have a little bit of review. What do we have right now? And get a little bit familiar with what kind of step definitions do we have, and how does these new things would be fitting to the existing step definition. So probably what I would do if this would be a real project, that before hitting the create class, I would probably look around in my step definition classes and see whether there is anything related to these kind of things that we would like to say here. So definitely this question suggestion are making sense when somebody is asking a question. And for asking a question, we already have a bunch of scenarios. And actually, we even have some step definition class called question asking step definition. So probably if this would be the a real project, this is what I would start. So that, oh, okay, it looks like that we have a couple of different good steps or step definitions that are related to the question asking. And definitely the suggestions are relating to this topic. So maybe, at least for now, I'm not creating a brand new class, but I'm just putting it into the question asking step definitions class. And let's see whether it fits. If it's not fitting, I can still split it later on into a separate class that will be working all fine. So before blindly hitting to the create button, probably what I should do first, I should do a review first, and if I'm happy with the result, then I can create a new class. Or in this case, I want to extend an existing class, so I will just call this copy to clipboard, which is going to be basically copying these 2 method skeletons to the clipboard, so that I can paste it. I will now just paste it to the very end of this file, and now I can start working on the automation things for that. I will not deal today with the automation bits of that, but what I would like to say that SpecFlow is trying to do their best efforts, or the Visual Studio extension is trying to do their best efforts to figure out what kind of step definition suggestions to provide. But this is only a suggestion. So this means that whenever SpecFlow or the extension has suggested you to start with some methods, you can always consider that and think about whether they are really fine, and make some manual modifications if necessary to be able to do that. I think these 2 step definitions are just fine, so I wouldn't make any change. But just imagine that I have somewhere in another scenario, I have another then step saying that then the rating should be above 3. Okay, so that's the step definition. Let me just compile so that my Visual Studio can pick up the step definitions that I already have. Okay, so this is this is a new step definition, and if you just ask some suggestion for them, let me just copy to clipboard and paste it so that you can better see it. But you can see that since it was the step was saying that the rating should be above 3, SpecFlow or the Visual Studio extension thought that this 3 should be an integer, should be a whole number. But we know that the rating is not necessarily a whole number. Right now, we happen to make a verification for a whole number, but maybe next time we want to check it with 3.5 stars or 3.5 rating. So definitely this decision that that Visual Studio did was not fully correct. And it can happen that I need to make some manual fix for that. So maybe I just change to float or whatever, and I change this to float or double, or somehow changing the type of the thing, that's absolutely possible. And sometimes you need to do such small fixes. Let me show you another example that is interesting. So if I just say, let me just get rid of that. So let's make another then step. Then the question should be voted up promptly. Okay, if I ask for a step definition for that, again, copy to clipboard and paste it here just that you can better see. So right now, this step definition, just consider that this is just a free text. However, actually up and down is for us an enumeration value. We have an enumeration called vote direction. Let me just show you vote direction. So we have an enumeration called up and down. So actually maybe what we really wanted to say here, that here there is a parameter should be coming, and that's actually should be a vote direction parameter that should be processed here. So in some cases, it can happen that the suggestion is not matching the type of the parameter, and it can happen that sometimes it will not realize that there is a parameter inside, and it just makes it without a parameter for that. So that's also possible. So let's consider that we just that we haven't changed that, and we just kept it as it is. And maybe in another scenario, somewhere we would like to have the down version of that, right? So in this case, again, what we have learned, we have this purple color. Purple color means that there is an undefined steps. And we have learned that what we would need to do, we would need to go to define step and start copying to clipboard and start working on a new step definition, right? But as you see, this is not true. So even though that this was highlighted as an undefined step, the problem was not that it was undefined. The problem was that we haven't realized that actually the other one should be a parameterized one. And maybe if we change that to a parameterized one, we wouldn't even get a new undefined step in the feature file. So Visual Studio and SpecFlow is trying to give you as good suggestions as possible, but it's always you who is in control, and it's always you who would need to decide whether you really need a new step definition or not, and whether the provided syntax or the provided parameterization is really as you wish that to be. So that's basically what I would like to highlight for at least for this this topic when you need to define new steps. Okay, that's what we discussed. The other thing is that we would like to establish, especially when we are working on a new behavior. So something new is expected in our application, and we would like to support that thing. Then we would like to, for a moment of time, we would like to focus on that particular feature. Let me just remove this rubbish that I was just putting here, and let me just again rerun my tests. One thing that I don't know if you have noticed, you can consider that maybe this is a bug or at least a not necessarily correct behavior from the test execution framework, but actually here in the Visual Studio test run, if I'm just collapsing up all my tests, then everything looks fine. So at least there is a green icon there. But as you have seen, if we are just opening up to the details, actually it turns out that we have some problem that we would need to manage. Finding these scenarios, finding the right scenario that you would like to rerun multiple times because this is the thing that you are currently working on is quite cumbersome. It's not so easy to keep, and it takes maybe just a lot of time. And for that, many BDD practitioners are trying to focus their view. Typically, I do it in a way that if I would like to focus on this particular scenario, let's say that this is what I'm about to automate and implement, I'm just putting a temporary tag for that. It could be anything. I usually just call it focus. That's my temporary tag. And because if you are putting a tag on a scenario, then basically when SpecFlow is generating a test from this scenario, then that test will have some sort of test category based on the tag. Let me just show you what I want to say with that. So let me, to be able to generate the test and have this working again, I would need to do a compilation. But once I did the compilation, actually the generated test, which is this one, is already having some test categories related to the text it has we have on that. In this Visual Studio Test Explorer, these test categories are, for some weird reason, they are called traits. But if I'm just hovering my mouse over the traits, and of course you will not see it because it's too small, but what you would see is that the focus is somewhere inside, so that somehow it recognized that this particular test is tagged with the focus. And if it's tagged with the focus, actually I can also filter for that. This Test Explorer window has a nice filtering infrastructure. I have to filter it with, I will zoom in a second, trait colon, and then the name of the tag without the at, so focus. So that's what I needed to write in here. Let me just zoom in here so that you see. I said zoom, yes, thanks. So basically what I said, I just typed in here trait colon focus. And what you can see as a result that that only those scenarios are listed in this in the window that have the focus tag. So now I can even use this this run thing. Now it's changed to run all that is in view, and basically then what will happen, then this is just running this particular test, and I can just quickly check whether my progress with the work is really as I expected, and I can really progress well. So that's something that is a useful practice, especially for those cases when you are implementing new behavior. And of course, once you are finished with this scenario, it turns into green. Just simply remove the focus tag and then move your focus to the next one. So that's what makes sense to highlight here. Okay, so basically those were the kind of notes that I wanted to make for this kind of changes when we are doing a new behavior and extend testing capabilities. Of course, partly we have seen these kind of actions earlier in the mainly on the first day as well. But let's move on and let's see some other common practices that we wanna focus on. So another common set of changes was when you are revising or correcting the language in the feature file or in the scenario. And obviously for that you need to also adapt the testing code, the step definitions for the language changes. These are the things that I wanna show right now. And for that I need to switch to my right starting point. Okay, so so let me just go back to my Visual Studio, and let's say that that these things, while I was just fast forwarding my code base, these things are now automated and they are all passing, hopefully. Let's see. So I'm still working on these two scenarios, and we are already at the stage where this thing is already automated and works in the application. And maybe at some point or at this point, I'm just reviewing the phrasing of my scenarios, and for whatever reason, I'm just not happy with those, and I would like to change them a little bit. Of course, everything that I'm doing here now will be a little bit made up, but I mean, you can imagine that there can be some changes in the wording. So just for the sake of the example, let's say that here we have I have this scenario working in a way that the user is authenticated. When the user starts asking the question as, then the suggestion list should be. And if you remember the application, this was not really true. When I have started to type in my question, the suggestion didn't appear immediately. I actually had to wait for a couple of seconds until the suggestion is actually displayed. So if we really want to be picky, then we could say that that step is not really true, because you just not simply just start asking a question, but what you really need to do is, and let me just rename that, start asking a question as below and pause. So the wait a little bit. Let me just not do this renaming yet. So that's what I would like to rephrase my scenario and adapt those changes to be able to do that. So I was very keen on putting this here and start to work on the code to be able to get that working. But it's very important to highlight that what we are doing here now is some sort of refactoring. We are changing in this case, the phrasing of our scenarios, and we would like to make these changes working all across the entire code base. So if this is a refactoring, it's very important that we are somewhat protected that whether we did this change properly. And a good way to protect yourself for these kind of changes is to verify whether the scenarios were passing before. If you haven't run the scenarios, you don't know whether they are passing or not. And maybe it can happen that you do a lot of magic to rename this tab, and finally they will fail, and you will never know whether they were already failing before or this is a new failure. So that's why it's super important, and it should be always the step number one that you should do is that the tests are passing. Of course, if this would be in a GitHub or a Git repository, maybe I would even check in or make a commit for the code so that I really start from a clean state. So right now, fortunately, we have our scenarios passing. But before I do any kind of rename, the other thing that I would typically do, I would try to see what is the impact of this change. So that because we said that these step definitions are global, so they might be reusable in many different feature files. So just because I see a feature file where this particular step is used, it doesn't mean that that is not used in other feature files. So probably it makes sense to check whether how much it is used in other places. And for that, the Visual Studio extension is for your help, because it provides a context menu item in the code, so in the step definition, called Find Step Definition Usages. And what it does, it basically lists you all the usage of this particular step definition. Now we have only 2, and all of them are in the same feature file, so probably the impact is not that high. But if it would be a longer list, then we would probably need to go through that and validate whether we want to rename it in all of the places or only in a few places, and do it like that. Another cool thing that this tool can do, that especially if you are having a long list, if you click on one, then the list disappears. So it's very hard to just go through all the items. But there is show results on the output window kind of command, and then basically all these lists is listed here, and I can just go through them, double click on these, and they will jump on the usage. So now I see that this is the 2 usage that I have. So let's do the rename. Renaming could be done manually, so I could just change the steps here and change the step definition expression here as well. And many of the cases, that's what you would need to do. But for simpler cases, especially the ones that we have right now, we have a rename step command that can be used. It unfortunately doesn't work with all of the step definitions yet, but at least for the simpler ones, it already works, and hopefully it will be getting smarter and smarter. By the way, the Visual Studio integration is also an open source product, so feel free to help us with improving these kind of things. So here I just needed to provide a rename, and actually it did the rename. It renamed it in the feature file in all places where it was used, and it also renamed my expression here. As you can see, it didn't rename the method, so that's something that currently I would need to either just keep it as it is. The method name doesn't really count, but I mean, of course, it makes sense to keep it in sync with the step, or I would need to do that manually. Sometimes if you partially rename, or you have a more complex rename scenario, then you do it in a way that you just keep the original one for a while, create a new step definition, and slowly progress with the old ones, and and remove it from everywhere. But finally, you will probably get to the point where it's not used anywhere else. And at that point, it makes sense to delete that. So try to not keep unused step definitions in the code base. There is a thing you can put an obsolete attribute on that, but unfortunately it's not reported that nicely. So that doesn't really work that well. So after rename, if you have any leftovers, make sure that you keep them. That you remove them. By the way, I was using the rename step command in my Visual Studio because this was a simple step. If in a complex case, you can also try to do some magic with Visual Studio, because in Visual Studio you can also do a kind of regular expression-based search and replace. And there are some specific steps for that. I will not go through them. You will anyway get the slides, and you can make some experiments with that if you have some complex cases that are not supported by the rename step command. So that was a simple case where we just simply corrected the wording of the step. But of course, sometimes you have some more complex patterns or more complex things, changes that we would need to process. Let me just jump to my right code base, and yes, for that. Okay, so let's consider a couple of further cases. The first thing, again, these examples will be slightly artificial, but I mean, you will get the point probably. So that the first thing is that when we were reading this scenario, now we have this posing in there, which we simply like, but actually we always have to say that the user is authenticated, and it feels a little bit too verbose. So an idea was coming that instead of saying "and the user is authenticated" when the user starts asking a question, our idea would be to merge these two steps into a single one, and that single one could be maybe phrased like, let me just copy that. So I will just keep them for a second as a reference, and I would like to make a step like and I actually need the data table. So I would like to merge these two steps into a single one, saying that when an authenticated user starts asking a question, and basically that implicitly means that it's authenticated and they are starting asking a question. Actually, they are also posing. So that's what we wanna do. How can we do that? Definitely, this is going to be a new step definition. This is not a replacement of this step definition, and it's also not a replacement of that step definition. It's basically a combination or composite step definition that we want to do. So basically, we can use the same thing that we did before. We can just go to define step. By the way, I have used now several times the thing where I was just saying go to definition, and actually then it was jumping to the step definition. Actually, if you are using this go to definition command on a step which is undefined, that basically SpecFlow says that, or the Visual Studio extension says that, hey, it looks like that you try to navigate to an undefined step. Maybe what you really want to do is you would like to start the definition. Would you like to copy this method skeleton to the clipboard? And you can say yes, and basically that's a shortcut for saying define step, copy to clipboard. You can just say F12 or go to definition and say yes, and then your code is copied to the clipboard. So now I make this composite step like here, and as you have seen, it actually needs to compose when the user is authenticated and then this other step as well. And the question is, how would I be able to do that? Let's first look at how this when the user is authenticated was actually done. Fortunately, this authentication is a very common thing. We were talking about that yesterday when we were talking about the shared things. So on the authentication context, this was used for the context injection. We anyway have an authenticate method. So that thing seems to be simple. Probably that's the thing that I should actually start with. But what comes after is basically the same step that we had before. One option would be, sorry, for that would be just to call this method. So I could say that because this is just a C# method, I can say that when the user is authenticated and pose, let's just fix the parameters. Again, this was a case where the parameters were not really, the parameter type wasn't guessed correctly by default. So I fixed that. So I could use this this tab definition from the other one, and that would be working. So that would be absolutely a valid, technically valid solution. And probably if you just have this in one single case in your code base, that wouldn't really cause a big trouble. But if you are starting to call step definitions from each other, then it's very easy to get into a chaos mode, because this means that you are building up a lot of dependencies between what your steps really mean, and any kind of changes for that is always causing an avalanche, and it's very hard to get a clear understanding what is really happening in there. So my suggestion is that instead of calling the step definition from the other, since we anyway have a nice structure, we anyway have we anyway have extracted everything, the automation logic to the drivers. So our code is anyway simple enough. It's better to reuse the things from the driver calls, and actually the how to make this how to suggest this question is still remains the same, and basically I just reused the driver code instead of reusing the step definitions. Sometimes, obviously, you need to have some multiple phrases. I was showing you yesterday that you could even theoretically have multiple step attributes with different phrasing, or you can use also the cucumber expression alternations and so on to make different phrasing. But at the end, hopefully, we got to the thing, and hopefully this is still running. So basically with that, what I demonstrate is what is the process of making such composite step definitions. Okay, so once we made this composite step definition, we can see the other way around, how to make a split of the step definition. So we just made this composite step definition right now, so it's stupid to immediately split it, but I mean, that's just for the sake of this demonstration. Let's say that at the end, it looked like that that this was looking good, but someone suggested that this step is really doing too many things, so maybe we should have some separation in there. So instead of this, they were suggesting that we should have two steps actually, and these two steps should be like that. Let me just put it in and then explain it to you, and I need the data table as well again. And just comment out the old one. So instead of this one long step, which was saying that when an authenticated user starts asking a question as below and pose, actually we want to split it into two steps, saying that given an authenticated user has started a question as, this is the question starting point, and then they say that when the user poses to see the suggestions, then the suggestions should come. I mean, it's we are somewhat separating the different concerns and making it clear. Since now this is the second given in this method, obviously I could use an and here that would have exactly the same effect, but it would be probably a nicer readable thing. Okay, so so how to work with that? Again, we could use the good old define step copy to clipboard, and because there is no direct things for that. But right now, again, we would need to think it over how to separate that. Definitely, the authentication should come to the first one, and definitely when we are performing the suggestions, should come to the second one. And obviously, for that, we need to know what question we were asking. So basically, what we can do, let me just fix first the parameters. So what we can do is simply use the technique that we used yesterday. So sharing data, you need to share this ask question with this other step definition. So we can do that since these are in the same class. We can just simply declare a field. I already did that just for the sake of simplicity, and just use that field to communicate that. So let's just initialize it here. Ask question equals ask question. Now we can use the underscore ask question. In this particular case, that would be basically the way how we could split that particular step definition. Okay, so again, now we did this refactoring step. Now our steps are passing. One thing that you should really think about is that we don't leave unused step definitions. So probably now there are a couple of unused ones. I could use this checks the usages. This is used, but actually this should have been refactored anyway. But that one, as far as I remember, is not even used anymore. So definitely this is one that we can immediately delete and make sure that the other is also cleaned up before we move on. Okay, so that's some notes, some useful practices for managing changes in the scenario that we would like to reflect in the automation code as well. So here we have seen at the end that we have seen some unused step definitions, and the good question is how can we find the unused step definitions for this in our code base. And actually by that we are already at this refactor and improve test section, because time to time we would like to clean up our solution and figure out whether there's any unused step definition in the code, because these are causing some overhead. Unfortunately, in Visual Studio, there is no easy way to do that. Of course, you could do what I did, like calling this find usages if I suspect that this is wrong, and then it would tell me that it is wrong. Other than that, there is no tool that would basically list all of the unused step definitions. But fortunately, there is something which we will talk about at the end of the today's session, that SpecFlow plus Living Dog Generator, which is having a nice additional feature in the analytics stuff I will show you later, that it shows all the unused step definitions. So basically, this report can be used also to clean up the things and work with and keep your scenarios somewhat cleaner. Okay. The other direction of the question, that okay, if we have cleaned up our step definitions and they are really they are only the only used ones are in our system, how can I avoid that I have duplicated steps? So when I say duplicated step, that means that a step which is similarly phrased like an existing one. And again, unfortunately, there is no magical solution. So typically, to be able to have to avoid that you are creating multiple similarly phrased step definitions for the same thing, is to do that practice that I was showing you, that before you start generating the step definitions, make a review. Check how your existing code is, what kind of phrases your existing step definitions are using. And of course, if your step definitions are in a nice structure, then it's much easier to do that. Otherwise, basically, you would need to at least maybe have even a review session, or pairing with someone, or having some scenario demos to your teammates, so that you are teaching them what kind of step definitions we have introduced, so that they can also learn what kind of things can be done for that. However, there is one technical solution that can still help you in this case. And it's again related to the Visual Studio plugin. Actually, in the Visual Studio plugin, if you start typing a step, probably you have seen that basically you get a list of possible step definitions that you could choose from. So obviously you can also review this list. As the list is such short like mine, it's maybe not that hard, but of course in a real application there might be hundreds of items in here, so it's not so easy to just review all of the possible when steps from this code base. However, this list is pretty smart because it can do some filtering, and the filtering that it is basically working in a way that you just need to type in some keywords that you remember. You don't necessarily have to even remember the order. So maybe I just want to know that want to see whether there is an event step which is related to question, and it's related to vote. And then basically you see that that I found that the user votes the up or down the question. That's an existing step, and that I can reuse. So basically the way of working, at least in Visual Studio, is that just type in those keywords that you remember, and then the list will be shorter, so that you can better find the one that you were searching for. So that's maybe a technical solution, but I think the real solution is to keep a clean structure of your step definitions. But then the question comes that, okay, but how can we make a clean structure? So how to structure the step definitions? And I probably didactically it's not the best, but maybe it makes sense to start with how not. Typically, it doesn't make sense to structure the step definitions by the feature files, because these are anyway global and you will use them in anyway different feature files. I've seen some people grouping them by given steps, when steps, and then steps into separate classes. That's also not that useful, because sometimes these steps are anyway related to each other. The when is doing something that the then step would like to verify, so it's better to keep them together. And of course, it's also not very good to keep some super long step definition classes. For myself, I try to keep this rule of thumb of 10 step definitions per file. If there are more than 10, then I should start feeling some sort of pain, and that speaks for maybe splitting the step definitions, step definition files. So the final answer is that basically you need to structure your step definitions by the area of the application they are automating. So that should be the key driving factor. So that, for example, every step that is dealing with the registration is an area of your application that's the registration related step definition should be in the same class. If you are using these drivers will also help you a little bit. So if you have a step definition class with tons of drivers required, then probably that step definition class is doing too many things. So that's probably makes sense to watch for. And sometimes it's even, you need to make subcategories. So for example, in this application, there are plenty of steps and step definitions that are related to questions. So if I would make a questions step definition class, that would have a plenty of step definition method, too much. So therefore, I started to create subcategories. So I have a question data step definition, I have a question voting step definition, question answer step definitions, and of course, you can also use them in separate files. You can also use subfolders as well, if they work well. Okay, so and it can happen that if you are doing that, then at the end, your step definition classes should be split to smaller ones, and that's what I would like to very briefly show you, because of one thing that again I would like to highlight. So for that, I need to go for the question data step definitions. So it's question data step definition. No, that's not question details. Question data step definition. This is basically a step definition class that contains a lot of given steps, which are helping me to prepare some questions in the system. So you see that given there is a question asked and things like that. So this is it has a bunch of given steps which are related to the questions, the asked questions. But actually, after some time, we also started to put on some answer generators as well. So actually, you see that these last 3 step definitions they are related to questions because they are generating answers for questions, but still, I mean, their answers are a specific subpart of questions. So maybe if I feel that this step definition class is getting too big, then a good idea would be to move away these answer related step definitions to a separate class. And that's what I could do. Let me just do that to show you what is the process for that. Unfortunately, there is no Visual Studio magic for that. So basically what you need to do, you need to make a simple class. I call it, what should I call it? Answer. I have it in my notes, whatever I call it, answer data. Yes, answer data step definitions. So I have a new class. I will make it public. And basically what I need to do, I need to move these step definitions, these three, to the other class. That's fine. Fixing the namespace usages. As you can see, actually it has some dependencies. It's depending on the question context and the question mother. So these are some context classes that I injected. I had it injected in the previous one. So basically I need to have injected in this other one as well. Right now I'm just copying it together with the constructor and just changing the class name to be able to, of course, I need to do it properly to be able to have that working. And then hopefully this is now passing and I will need to be able to have my my steps. But actually, if I would run, I will not spend the time for running. If I would run the test right now, it would fail. It would fail because it would say that, hey, I can't find this, the step definitions for these steps. And the reason why they are failing, because I have made a mistake, and I was making this mistake because it's a mistake that many people commonly do. I mentioned yesterday that SpecFlow is only looking at classes that have the binding attribute. So make sure that if you are extracting step definitions to a new class, you shouldn't forget the binding attribute. Otherwise, SpecFlow will not find these things. So, so that's basically this thing, and actually with this way we can make our step definitions more clean. Why this challenge is listed here, that's a good question, but maybe that's a point where I would like to make a challenge for you. If you would like to make have a good practice, then take a look at this question suggestion feature file. Now we were playing with that, and these are all automated using the control automation thing, but they are not automated through using the web UI. So if you want to really having a good practice, try to automate the same feature file through web UI as well. And if you are sending me a pull request, I will not accept the pull request because I would like to keep the repository like it is, but I'm happy to give you a review and some feedback on your implementation. So that's a challenge that I encourage you to take. Okay, so a couple of high level things that probably make sense before we have the quiz. Actually, two things. Yes. So one thing is that how can we share step definitions across multiple SpecFlow projects? I think on Monday we had a Q&A question related to that. And that's what I would like to make a few notes for. But before I do that, I have seen, and definitely there is some good cases where you need to share step definitions between different projects. But I have also seen this kind of pattern that people were creating tons of different projects for every single area of the system. And I think in majority of the cases, this is not necessary. So whenever you have multiple SpecFlow projects in your solution, you should really think twice that, do you really need a separate project for this? Maybe just unnecessarily complicating your life with these many small projects. There was a time in .NET development where people were creating a single project for everything, and it was very common to have Visual Studio solutions with 60 plus projects. But that's not the trend nowadays. Nowadays, trying to have bigger compositions is much more convenient, and it's much more easier to maintain the dependencies and many other things. So that's just a kind of warning before you would actually do that. But if you need to do that, then this is absolutely possible. So you can make step definitions and hooks and many other things in any .NET project. And those .NET projects can be referred in other SpecFlow projects. That wouldn't be enough, so that's one thing that you need to do. But the other thing that you need to do, you have to tell SpecFlow that, hey, SpecFlow, if you are looking for a step definition, please also check this other assembly as well. And this is something that you can do by adding a SpecFlow configuration file to your project. Typically, the SpecFlow configuration file should be called specflow.json, and it has to be in the root folder of your project. If you are doing it manually, then you really have to take care that you are doing it right. If you use Visual Studio, we have a new item template, add new item, and in the SpecFlow section, we have a SpecFlow configuration file. I think you have to rename this to specflow.json, and then it's just adding an empty configuration file into your system, and it even provides some sort of JSON schema. So there will be some sort of IntelliSense. So you see that step assemblies, and I can make a new step assembly with assembly equals, and I can say this is my assembly name. So it's easier to find the exact configuration that is needed for this kind of thing. Okay, so that's this is a way to share automation logic with multiple projects. The other thing is, because I mentioned that maybe you don't even need multiple projects, how can we have multiple automation targets or multiple automation patterns in the same project? So for example, if you wanna have some scenarios that are automated through the web API and some scenarios that are automated through the controller in the same project, how this can be done. Basically, there are two ways to do that, or two basic approaches for that. The first one is the dynamic approach, and basically that's using the concept of the drivers that you have anyway did, hopefully. If you have these driver classes, then I was showing you yesterday that the step definitions were anyway more or less the same. So basically you can make a configuration that is dynamically creating either the controller-based driver or the web API-based driver, depending on some configuration. And with that way, what you can achieve that while you are developing, you can use the faster one, which is probably the controller-based driver. And on the build server or on a nightly build, you can run the whole scenario set also for the controller, or maybe through the UI as well. So that's a practical approach if you want to have if you want to check all the scenarios or the majority of the scenarios in different test automation targets. But the other one, which is a little bit where you need a little bit of more support from SpecFlow, is if you want to statically decide. So maybe you want to say that I have a bigger feature file, and the first one I would like to go through the web API, and all of the rest, because this is a happy path scenario, and all of the rest should go through the controller because that's faster, and that's the thing that you can still mix in the same scenario. Let me just show you how that works. But for that, I need to reset again my things. Yes. Yes, that one. Okay. So to be able to do that, what I did, I created another, so again, we are in the home feature file that we were talking about yesterday, and the step definitions of this home feature file, the majority of them are in the home step definitions class. We have step definitions here, like for checking the home page and asserting on the message and things like that. So just for the sake of the demonstration, let's say that I have created another home step definition class, which is having the same step, the when the user checks the home page thing. Right now, this is a valid step definition, but the binding attribute is commented out. Let me just make a build for that, because otherwise it will show some error. Let me just show you how what the error is provided if I have the binding attribute. If I would have the binding attribute here, then basically what SpecFlow would say, and actually the Visual Studio extension is already showing that, it is saying that, hey, there is an ambiguous step because this step is matching to this step definition and this step definition as well. And of course, SpecFlow doesn't know which one to pick. Maybe this one would be the controller-based automation. This one would be the web API-based automation, but what SpecFlow cannot decide. So the idea would be that that you would need to mark the scenario that you want to run through the web API, for example, with a tag. Doesn't matter what tag name you are using. Right now I'm using web API. And now what you need to tell to SpecFlow that this particular set of step definitions should only be used if the scenario has the web API tag. And this is something that you can do with the scope attribute. So you can say scope at tag equals web API. And basically if you do that and compile, then Visual Studio will not be confused anymore, as you see. And somehow if I say go to definition on this, then it jumps to my web API version. And if I say go to definition of that, then it jumps to my controller base. So basically that's one way how you can statically decide which automation target should be done. Okay, and basically with that, we are finished with this bigger chunk of section that we had for today, the daily practices. I think what is important to highlight here is that you need to identify the kind of task, not just do the things, but try to think about over that what is the kind of thing that I'm currently doing. Am I implementing a new behavior? Am I just revising the language, or do I do a refactoring on the and improve the tests and choose the right tools accordingly? And I hope that these examples were somehow giving you a few hints on how to do that. But the key thing for that, at least for the automation code, is to have a clean structure of your step definitions. Don't forget that try to structure your step definitions based on the area of the application they are automating. Try to keep them small, not much more than 10 step definitions. Split them, make substructures if needed, and then many things will be much easier. Okay, and with that, finally, we got to our fun time. So it's time for doing our quiz.
So fun time and
fun time for you and a little bit worrying time for Andy.
Fun time for me and struggling the fourth time in a row with Mentimeter. And full screen share. So you should see the screen.
Yes, we do.
Good. Yeah, 5 questions. Faster you answered correctly, you get more points. Profanity filter works in Chrome. Let's start, and the winner gets an Amazon voucher. Let's start. Here's the enter code. Enter QR code.
Yeah. And we are still missing the music, yes.
Yeah, didn't get to it.
Legal department. No, we don't have legal. I don't know, maybe we have. We do, but
I have a legal department, but...
but we weren't even there to ask them.
Yeah. But what we did is we adjusted the time for the longer questions.
Hopefully.
Yeah, so we changed something in there was a field. Let's see if it works.
That's not a question. Someone says that Disney is cool about legal stuff. I'm pretty sure that Disney is cool, but our legal department is not necessarily that cool about it. So, you know, when worrying starts, then. It really feels like Friday. I don't know why. Probably I don't want to work tomorrow. That's the what I'm afraid I'm afraid I have to.
When do you not work, Gosh?
Yeah, yeah.
So let's wait 20 seconds and then start the quiz. Three, two, one. So let's start. Only 48. So
Higher chance
that
to.
was too big.
What happened?
I pressed one time too much the keys.
Okay.
So how many downloads does the Spec for main NuGet package has as of
Today.
rough number today 2 hours ago?
Very good.
Very good.
Most of you. And this was not a tricky one. It was really the highest number. It was the good one. When I was preparing for my driving license, my trainer always says that always choose the longest answer.
Good. I think now we have the question with the longest answer.
Yeah,
long answers.
Longer answers. Let's see whether the longest is the right one.
Why do BDD practitioners mark the scenarios with the add formulated tag?
Yeah, maybe we should have rephrased it. Why good BDD practitioners? So it's not to be ready to be tested, because the formula says it's not ready to be tested. So it's exactly the opposite. Probably this was confusing. Anyway, so that to avoid false build failures, that's the right answer. Okay, very good. 12 people made it, so they have now better chances to win.
Eoin, twice the fastest. Let's see. Question 3. What is a good practice to structure step definitions? A feature file by given when by number of C# line in the step definition class, by the area they automate.
Let's see. Yeah,
yep.
And they automate. That's what we have seen. And 27 people got more further in the race. Let's see. He or she has a very fast internet access, or I don't know, they are very good, right? And having a fast internet connection.
And a fast browser for me.
Yeah. Maybe they should write at the end whether they're whatever. So yeah.
How can you filter in the Visual Studio Test Explorer window to only see the scenarios tagged with the add focus tag?
Yeah, category column focus, trait column focus, is it hard to column focus, or tag column focus? No one was marking with this easy hard to focus thing. Okay, yes, it trade focus. It's somewhere hidden, but there is a link to the documentation of what kind of expressions you can do in the Visual Studio Text Explorer. You can even do negative filters, so everything which is not tagged with something, and you can do some nice combinations of things. Makes sense to check that out. Okay.
Yep.
And this was the last one, right? Or
no, we
have one more.
One more, but Ian didn't answer it.
Or not right. I don't know what is actually showing.
Yeah. So last question.
Ooh.
What is the name of the free tool which you what?
No, once again.
So what is the name of the free tool which you can use to generate HTML living document from your feature files and test results? Specflow plus report, Specflow minus living doc, Specflow outdated doc, or Specflow plus living doc?
This is something that we will see, but there was a show. Yeah. The Specflow minus a dash living doc was confusing people, but no, it's Specflow plus living doc. That's the right one. So that 20 people made it right. And let's see finally who is going to be the winner. And Larry, very good, congratulations.
Congratulations. Again, as the days before, please send me an email to info@specflow.org. Put the email address in the chat, and please mention for which Amazon store you want to have the voucher.
Okay.
That we can get it to you next week.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now, as you got used to in the previous days, we will have a 5 minutes break. So refresh yourself. There's no music. I mean, you can sing for yourself. I will not sing alone. And yeah, see you in 5 minutes. Hello and welcome back. So yeah, let's move on so that we have more time at the end for the questions. So as mentioned in the agenda, so far we have seen how the automation solution should be structured. And now I would like to talk a little bit about how to organize the scenarios themselves, or with other words, how to organize the feature files. And there are a couple of questions again that could be considered here. I mean, these are the questions that I also receive and that people will get to once they are reaching a certain size of feature files. So that should we structure them by the stories? And generally, what is the difference between a story and a feature? I would like to dig into that a little bit more in detail. What should be the main factor of building up the feature structure? So based on what we should make the feature structure, how can we make some arbitrary grouping with the tags, and how can we keep track of the tags, and how to share feature files across multiple projects. That also happens for bigger projects sometimes. So these are the 4 questions or 4 topics that I would like to address in this section, actually in this order. And the first one that I would like to talk about is the thing is that what is the difference between a story or user story and a feature? And you will decide how much it helps for you. But for me, it was to understand the difference between these two different. I was just wondering because Zoom was saying that now participant can see my screen, but I hope that you were seeing my screen even earlier, right? Anyway, so
we can see it.
Unnecessary, annoying notifications. So at least for me, it was helping a lot to understand what is the difference between a story and a feature, especially because this feature thing is not really well defined, as you will see. So basically, we can say, and this is this image will help me to guide through this thing. Basically, we can say that a user story is representing an increment or increase of the business value, something that the application can do more than it was able to do before, and definitely, if we are talking about a big feature, then we need to split it up into smaller increments, smaller things, smaller stories, uh, just to be able to get early feedback. So the point is that if a big feature would be done in one chunk, then only at the end it would turn out that something is wrong. But if you are making it a smaller increments, then basically we can get a faster feedback or early feedback. So that's the point of the of the user story concept, at least in contrast with the feature. Uh, uh, if you are thinking about when you are, so especially if you are thinking about Scrum, that when we finish a story, that's a great thing. Yeah, the story is done and we got some points and whatever. So that's all good thing. But actually, what we want to have is not what we just increase. So that the point is not how much it got better, but in long term, the more interesting thing is that what the system can do as a result. So in a very weird case, you can even imagine that the user story is even removing something that was unnecessary. And I mean, of course, we can celebrate that, but at the end, the point is that we don't have that anymore. Uh, so the capabilities of the product is the interesting, and that's a little bit more described by the features. So the feature files should somehow describe these kind of capabilities, and it's just to highlight the difference between the story and the feature. We can say that the stories can be done, but features never can be done. So we can always evolve them, you can always improve them, you can always make some improvements, so that features are never done. However, stories are finished. So that's the point. So again, if you would think about the Eiffel Tower as a feature and the different things there as stories, then at the end it doesn't matter that that particular part was done by story 2 or story 3, doesn't matter. At the end it is there, and that's what is important. So based on that, we can see how what does it mean for us with BDD and SpecFlow. So how does the feature file evolve? So how do we extend the feature file? And again, just not having a better idea for that, I will use this Eiffel Tower as a visualization, or as a metaphor for that. But I hope that this is going to be understandable. So whenever we are defining our first story for the Eiffel Tower, then we are describing the capabilities that at the end of the story one we should have. So in the case of the Eiffel Tower, probably we will have a foundation, we will have a first floor, and at the end we will have a tower of 27 meters if we really implement that. So we can describe these scenarios, we can automate those scenarios, and then we can start doing the work, and hopefully at the end we will have the first story finished. And now we have a feature which is just that small right now, but basically that thing is already implemented. And now we see that we don't want to stop here. I mean, this is all nice, but actually what we want is a more complex feature that we want. So we want to define the expectations for the next story. And for the next story, what we want to do, we want to have a second floor. We want to actually for to be able to implement the next story, we also need to introduce something which is a kind of temporary solution or a shortcut for our working process for right now. We are also implementing a tower crane to be able to work on the tower. And at the end, we will have a tower. Hopefully, we will have a tower of 115 meters. So in this case, what we have seen, we extended our feature file with 2 new scenarios, and one scenario has been changed because so far it was 57 meters. Again, the story is hopefully implemented. We have the tower crane, the story and whatsoever. And of course, we can move further. We are defining the story for the scenarios for the third story. Let's say that this introduces a new scenario called third floor, and we upgraded or changed the tower length or higher height to whatever 276 meters. And it turns out that this star crane is not needed anymore. So basically, as part of the stories tree, we are not only adding something to the system, but removing something to the system. And it also happens in software systems as well. So that the user story is not only adding things, but sometimes it's changing things, and sometimes it's even removing things. And then finally it is implemented, and then finally we have the last one with the antenna and the highest tower, and this is where we can say that that our feature, at least for now, it is implemented, but we know that it's never finished. So for example, in the year 2000, they have further changed the Eiffel Tower because they implemented some big 2000 signs on that or something like that. So the feature never finished, but the stories are finishing. And again, just like we said before, for a particular scenario, knowing whether this was introduced by story 4 or story 3, that's not so important. That's not the most important information. You can capture that. So for example, tagging could be a good solution for that because it's quite harmless and doesn't influence you too much. So if you really need to remember where the antenna was introduced, then you can mark it with a special tag. Again, you can use the tag name as you wish. Right now I would say calling it story colon 4. That's a tag name that I introduced, and that's a documentation about the story it was introduced. But as you see, so if I would need to put a tag on this tower of 324 meters, actually this scenario would have even 4 story tags because it has been introduced by story 1, but it has been modified by all the other stories as well. So it's not a one-one relation, definitely, for the scenarios. So on the other hand, it can happen that as the feature file grows, then we need to split it. So again, similarly like with the step definitions, we can see it growing. And if you feel that this feature file gets too big, then we can consider to do some sort of splitting on that and making sub-feature files. So maybe in our case, we just say that we make a split, the antenna goes to the tower communication.feature, and the everything else remains or we just rename the everything else to tower building.feature. And now we just let them continue growing. And of course, we can keep splitting it if necessary. So that's the kind of way how typically the feature files are evolving. And probably this is helping you to see that this is not the story that is influencing how you are making your features, but actually the feature that these stories are contributing to. So that basically even answers my second question. So that what should be the main factor for the feature structure? And now we know the features. That's why it's called a feature file, by the way. So no surprise here. That's good. So okay, so the feature file should be structured by the features, but how should be the features structured? And that's not an easy thing. So because in every application, there are a bunch of features, and these features are interconnected with each other and doing some other things. I have no very fixed guidance for that, how to structure your feature files, but I have a good hint. So we will talk about living documentation later on, but right now just say that these feature files will build up at the end a living documentation. So if we are using this word, then we can just hook on the documentation word from this. And what comes out of that at least that was helping me with many projects, that try to think about these feature files as user documentation. If you would probably make a user documentation, then your user documentation is structured in some way. There are some sections, subsections, whatever. And I just work on a product called SpecSync, and that's the user documentation of the SpecSync tool. And then you can see that this is a screenshot of that of its user documentation. Because if you are having a user documentation, then that had to be anyway structured in a meaningful order so that the users are not getting too confused. A good idea to try to mirror that structure also with your feature files. So this is on the left-hand side, you see the user documentation of this particular product. On the right-hand side, you see the feature files, the feature file structure and the scenarios of the same product. And now you can see that basically it has some similarities. So there is a section in the user documentation which describes the features, and there is a push related features described. We have a features folder and a push folder in the feature file structure as well. And then we have scenarios that are basically matching to the topics that are described in the user documentation. So basically, whenever the documentation was built up or the feature file structure was built up for that, the user documentation was considered, and somehow like that. I found this is a very useful hint. So feel free to use that. Think about if that would be a user documentation. How would you structure that, and what kind of subfolders, folders, naming, whatever would you use for that? And typically that will be good guidance for your feature files as well. Having the feature structure as the main structure for the feature files, obviously you might need to have some arbitrary grouping of your scenarios. And we have seen already that tags can be used for that. We have mentioned that this already on day 1 and day 2 as well. I don't want to spend too much time on that. So you can have different groupings for your scenarios, and you can nicely describe them with the tags. The good thing in tags that they are making your scenarios searchable, but they are harmless, so they are not really distracting the readability. So that I think they are quite of a sweet spot. But the interesting thing is that, or the important thing is that the tags should also be documented. If you are just randomly coming up with tag names, then nobody will ever remember that what did you want it to say with authenticated, and what does pricing really means, or what does fast means, and when should I use the fast tag for that. And for that, there is no magical solution. The good old glossary can help you with that. So for example, you can make a glossary where you can, if you anyway have a glossary, it also makes sense to describe the domain terms. So as you can see, for our application, for example, I have a glossary which is describing what is an answer, what is a user, what is a question, and so on. Just with a few words, it's not a big deal, but it might be helpful. And also it describes what kind of tags we are using. So we are using the formulated, and it's described why we are using it. We are using voting, whatever else is here. So that's what you can do. There is no standardized format how you can do that. If I do that, I usually put some sort of glossary.markdown file in my features folder. And actually, this is what you have maybe spot out in the code. So you see that I have this glossary.md. I mean, I started with underscore so that that's it in the top. And it's just a simple markdown file. And of course, I can also render some nice visible HTML page out of that. There are plenty of tools for that. So that's the thing that probably makes sense to mention, that this is documentation. So it makes sense not just to arbitrarily tagging things with different ways without informing the others, but just spend a few minutes to make a glossary about them. I think that's a good thing. And I think that the last question that I would like to mention in this section of the masterclass is how we can share feature files across projects. And this is not an easy thing, so definitely you will need to investigate this in detail before you fix on a solution. But the point is that sometimes the same feature files are going to be used in multiple testing solutions. So just imagine that you have an application which has some JavaScript front end and let's say .NET backend. Then maybe some of these feature files you wanna automate on the backend with SpecFlow, and maybe the same feature files you wanna automate with Cucumber.js by executing UI test with Electron or I don't know what. So that could be a valid concern. Unfortunately, and of course it can happen that you don't want to share all of the feature files, but most of the feature files, but a few of them you'd like to exclude. I mean, that's also possible. There are multiple solutions with SpecFlow, you have to be careful. Typically, the Cucumber frameworks are a little bit more flexible on that because they don't generate tests in the way how SpecFlow does, and therefore they just need to have a file somewhere, and they are happy. Doesn't matter where the file is sitting. SpecFlow is a little bit more picky on that. And typically, if you have such a mixed project, then it makes sense to start from the SpecFlow. So make it in a way that it works with SpecFlow, and then you can somehow make it work with the other solution as well. Definitely the easiest if you just put your feature files into a SpecFlow project and you just simply configure your Cucumber.js project to take the files from there. You can also use some, you can try to do some linking. Andy will say in a second that don't try, because linking is always is going to be always a problem. It will, so probably this middle alternative, you would definitely check that out before you finally set on that. But you can also use some Git magic, Git3, Git submodules to share the feature files with the multiple projects, especially if you have them in multiple Git repositories. So yeah, so that's it. Again, we said that you can exclude scenarios that you don't want to run with that particular tool. Again, SpecFlow is pretty picky, so there is no default exclusion. So by default, SpecFlow is considering all the feature files in your folder. Probably it's possible to write a simple SpecFlow plugin that is just simply skipping some of the feature files or just generating empty classes for that. I'm not aware of any plugin like that, but definitely you can use the filtering tools like with the straight filter in the Visual Studio or command line filters in command line execution, and exclude those scenarios that you don't want to run in that particular platform. So, and basically with that, we finish with this section. So we have seen that organizing, that we should organize the scenarios by features and not stories, and try to think about documentation when you wanna make the structure. Tags are perfect for arbitrary grouping. Glossary is very useful, and in complex projects you can even share some things. Okay, so I have two more things to remain, but this continuous integration part will be somewhat easier. So that basically what I want to say here is that what we are doing here is we are doing tests, and generally we are doing the testing here because we would like to improve our quality. However, the tests itself will not improve your quality. They are just indicator about what is the health of your system, and you need to watch for those alarms. Otherwise, you will not get any good answer. And of course, if you are just simply ignoring those or switching them off, then it's definitely not good. So test is a feedback tool, and it's very important to highlight that everyone should be aware of that. It sounds like a simple thing, but it has to be made clear that everyone is knowing what kind of feedback can we expect from a particular test kind, and particularly from BDD scenarios, so that we need to know, or everyone needs to know, what does it mean that if a BDD scenario fail, and how can we learn about that? And obviously the CI is a system, is a good tool to make that information available for you. But again, it's very important that you discuss and even document your testing strategy regarding that. Again, in one of my projects, I have documentation about the testing strategy for each particular test type. As you can see right now, the automated BDD scenarios, I have a small one-page documentation of what is the purpose of that test, how do we automate that, what is the structure, and such kind of things. And if you do that for all of your test kinds, then it will be still not a very long documentation, but it will be probably a good guidance. And very importantly, you can also document what are the feedback channels, what kind of CI builds you have, when they are running, what they are running, what to expect, what does it mean that if they are failing. So these kind of things are useful to document, especially if you are working with a bigger team. Integrating SpecFlow to the CI is typically easy. I mentioned on, I don't know which day, that our design decision was that SpecFlow is not running the test alone, but it asks some test execution framework to run it instead. And actually it turned out to be a useful thing for the CI integration, because actually at the end, even though that you are using a SpecFlow project, at the end, the thing that you have is a bunch of MS test or it's a bunch of NUnit test. And if your CI is able to run NUnit test, they will also be able to run SpecFlow test. So basically, running the SpecFlow test on the CI is not different at all from running any kind of tests in the CI. So you should just simply do it in exactly the same way. And again, you can provide some filters. Typically, the formulated is a typical filter criteria that we have here if you are using this formulated tag that I mentioned. Of course, if you are running the test, then you want to see some reports. But nowadays, fortunately, the CIs are anyway providing you a quite nice report. So if you open the build results, then you can basically browse through the result anyway. So I think it is less and less interesting to make a specific reporting tool for the test execution. Currently, SpecFlow doesn't have a built-in reporting tool. However, again, luckily, we are using the standard runners, and the standard runners are anyway providing a standard format of output, which is this TRX output. And there are a bunch of nice tools that can render nice HTML reports, execution reports from a TRX file. I have this one, I just found it on GitHub, but probably there are plenty of others as well. So if you really need such a report, if your CI report is not enough for you, then that would be a way to go. Or of course, you can also consider to have living documentation, but that's a little bit different. And that's what we will see in a second. So basically, for the continuous integration, the actual thing is that make sure that everyone is aware of the strategy, and otherwise it will be easy because we are anyway using the standard tools. So that's the last section for today is to talk a little bit about living documentation. And I promised that I would like to start with trying to make a definition for the living documentation. So basically what I want to say with this is that we anyway worked a lot. So we formulated these examples, we made them business readable scenarios, we automated them. Then actually we are almost there to really making it a living documentation. Because living documentation, and this is a nice summary from John Ferguson Smart, living documentation is, as the name suggests, both a documentation and living. It is documentation. It describes how an application works and what business rules affect it. And it is living because it is generated by an automated test suite, and each time the application is built. So it's always up to date. So that's what living documentation is. It's documentation. It describes how the application works, and it's living because it turns red if something goes wrong. But and as you see, we are almost there. So we have done all these things. But to be able to really having this living documentation is in use, so that people are really using your documentation, then the very important thing is that you have to make the living documentation somehow accessible to everyone. I mean, everyone within your project. So for you, probably it's easy to open Visual Studio and open a feature file for that. But think about your product owner. So will it be easy for your product owner to check out a Git repository and open a feature file in Visual Studio? Probably not, right? So that we somehow would need to make the living documentation better accessible. And that means multiple things. So that it also means that it will not work automatically. So you will need to have some time until we learn how such living documentation can be used. And of course, you can encourage and show how this can be used, so that for example, making it nice and making it easy to use, that's definitely a good point. But you yourself can also use the living documentation for demonstrating your progress. So what I did in one of my projects, that in our sprint demo, we were always starting by showing the feature files that we achieved in that particular sprint. And slowly with that, we were also teaching the product owners to be able to use that. And of course, you might even want to version and keep some history of this living documentation as well. And with that, basically, we got to the tool that is one option to get to this living doc, which is the SpecFlow plus living doc. You have seen it earlier. Basically, it is a free tool that can generate a living documentation from your SpecFlow project. It has two versions. One is which is integrated to Azure DevOps, but the other one, which I'm focusing on right now, is a standalone generator that can be used not only with Azure DevOps, but in any circumstance. And this is basically how such a report looks like. So I would like to quickly show you how this thing should be done. So I will have two things. One, I will show you how to set up the living doc generator, and then how to generate an actual living doc out of that. So for that, I just need to reset my project. And yeah, so this SpecFlow plus living documentation generator tool is actually implemented as something called the .NET Core tool. .NET Core tools, or .NET tools, are basically an infrastructure similarly to NuGet libraries, and they are also stored in NuGet. NuGet libraries are reusable code. And the .NET tools are reusable tools somehow, to say. So there is a similar, like with the NuGet packages setup, there is a similar setup available for the .NET tools. And maybe you have already used some .NET tools, and this is not new to you. But this thing, this .NET tool thing should be initialized first if you have never used the .NET tool before. You will have these things in the slides, so I will not, you probably will not be able to remember all these things. Basically, I have to say .NET new tool manifest, and what it does, it has created in my solution root folder a .config folder, and inside this .config folder it created a .NET tools JSON file. This is where all my installed .NET tools will be listed, and I have to check in this JSON file into the repository. So once it's done, my tool, .NET Core tool, is initialized. I can basically install the SpecFlow plus living doc generator as a .NET tool. That's the syntax: .NET tool install, and then the name of the tool. In our case, the name is such a long name: SpecFlow plus living doc.cli, whatever, that's the name. And once this is done, basically it is implemented, and actually you can already say things like .NET living doc, and basically the installed tool is already available for you. Right now I have installed it on my machine, but imagine that now I'm checking in this config file, and my colleagues are downloading this config file. To be able to have this living doc generator also available for them, they need to do something similar like the .NET restore for the project. In this case, this is called .NET tool restore, and that's basically what the others has to do, just to be able to make sure that they have the same tool downloaded. So that's one part of the installation. However, this in the living doc, this would be enough for simple cases, but for the to be able to gather some test execution results, there is also a SpecFlow plugin that needs to be installed. The SpecFlow plugin is a standard NuGet package, a standard NuGet library, so I would need to install it in my package manager thing. And I think if you just search for living doc, then you will find it. So this is SpecFlow plus living doc plugin. Yeah, just install it. You don't really have to do anything with that. It has some default configuration, which is just good for most of the cases. So now I have installed the plugin, I have installed the tool. Let's do some some living doc generator. But of course, to be able to generate a living doc, we need to have some test execution. So I'm just stepping into my controller folder and just run the test, .NET test. That's just the standard way of running the tests. I could run it from Visual Studio as well. Anyway, I'm just simulating that this is happening now from the build. You see that there is a one test failed. This is on purpose. I just made one test fail just to make the report a little bit nice. And so now the test execution has finished. And that means that in my project folder, in the bin debug whatever folder, there's a test execution JSON. This is a kind of result file that was created, and this is what the tool is going to use to be able to generate the actual report. So I need to generate the report. I have to say .NET living doc, and now I have to say that I want to generate it from a test assembly because there are also other options. And now I have to provide my assembly name. So this is in the bin debug netcore app, and it's called Spec Overflow Masterclass Controller.dll. Okay, and I need to say that I want to make it from that JSON file that you have just seen. So it's not visible this, but I said -t, and again bin debug netcore app, and it's called test execution JSON. I said test execution JSON, and now it is running, and hopefully it looks like it works fine. It generated an HTML. Just let me just open that. Of course, it opens on the other monitor. Anyway, so basically it opened the living doc that was generated. As you can see, it has the my feature structure. I can see my feature files, and I can see also the execution result. You can see that this particular one was failing. I can even see the error message. We can also look at the question suggestion scenario that we were looking at. This is actually a scenario outline where you can even and you see the examples. You can even toggle that you want to see with this particular example how that would look like. It's quite nice. And of course, you can do search, filter by tag, filter by keyword, and here we have this analytics tab that I also mentioned, which contains the unused step definitions, if there would be any. Okay, so basically in this, so what you have seen now, I'm just doing many things. So you have seen how to set up the project. I just keep it as a reference for the slide, and we have used the SpecFlow plus living doc generator. But at the end, basically we have some report, or no, it's not really a report. It's a living documentation that also contains the execution result. And basically, just as a last thought for that, all these things, all this bridging is related to that we want to make our tests connected with the requirements. So in some cases, traceability of the requirements is even more important in a formal way. So maybe you have some legal restriction to formally trace which user stories or which features those particular scenarios are belonging to. And of course, in that case, you have some ALM tool like Azure DevOps, something like that. And as you have seen earlier, you can use the tagging to make the connection of the scenarios to the existing items. You can even turn these tags in links to links with the SpecFlow plus living doc, and you might want to be able to. So in some cases, you might even want to represent even the scenarios as work items on your ALM tool. The tool that I was mentioning for you, where I was showing my documentation, is, for example, doing it in a way that it synchronizes the scenarios into Azure DevOps test cases. So if some company has a legal restriction to have all the test cases in Azure DevOps, then that would be one way of doing that. But of course, it depends on the exact expectations and the necessary integration requirements. Okay, so with that, basically we concluded this thing, so that the living documentation part. So I think producing this living documentation is really a good last step to make the story complete. Make sure that it is in use. So just generate a living doc but not use. That's not good. I think this SpecFlow plus living doc generator is a great tool, and in some cases more formal traceability of the requirements might be also necessary. Yeah, so end of lesson 4. These were basically the topics that we have seen today. Again, the key facts that we have that I would like you to take home with yourself from today. So keep this habit of this continuous maintenance thinking of scenarios and step definitions. Otherwise, if you are always delaying these, then you will get into technical debt or testing debt. Organize your scenarios based on features, capabilities, use the tags for grouping, think about BDD scenarios as feedback tools, and get the most out of these things by turning these into a living documentation. And actually, this was the end of the last session. So now we can. These were the. It's also at the end of the masterclass series. I hope that you enjoyed that and you got some good input for the different aspects of that. We have the recording. You will get the slides tomorrow. Maybe what I should
Next week.
Next week, of course.
Next week.
Maybe what I should just say as a farewell sentence, but we will do the Q&A anyway. So may SpecFlow be with you, and thank you very much. The coupon code is the same. I not repeat that. Let's jump to the questions because today there will be no further day to finish them.
Yeah, so let's start. First question. For the case we have both BDD tests with SpecFlow and automated non-BDD tests for the same system component project, should they live in the same project, or do you advise them to have different projects set up to keep them separate?
I don't think that I would have a general guideline for that. So there are both pros and cons on both sides. So I don't have a very generic advice. Or Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, I so in 97.5%, it's a good idea to have separate projects. Simply because how SpecFlow integrates into it, and if you need some setup, some one-time test run setup, that is this perhaps not available anymore because SpecFlow is using it, and then
or maybe then I didn't fully understood the question. Anyway, so
if the question was if should be unit tests and SpecFlow tests in the same
unit
project
test and SpecFlow tests, or
coded tests and SpecFlow tests.
Yeah. Sorry. Then I got the question. Yes, then I agree with Andy. Make them separate. Yeah. Makes sense. Sorry.
Saves headaches. Good. Next question. Are there chances that the specifications gotten could be written as user story in project management tools like Jira, Azure DevOps? When the refactoring happens, should we go back and update the stories, or they can be left as specification lives within the feature file now?
So basically the question is that what should we do with the user stories if the scenarios are later on changing? So I would just simply, so once the user story is done and it's completed, it's anyway not the right structure how you want to keep your information. So I would not touch that. That has been done at that time of when it was done. That was the specification, so it's not false. And at the end, the feature files or your living documentation is the single source of truth, what your system currently does. Of course, if you want to mirror that in the ALM tool, you can do that. So you can also make a feature work item there and sub-feature work item, but that will be anyway different from the story work items. So yeah.
Yeah. Good. Next question is long one. The summary is it's about step assemblies and have steps in multiple different projects because of the project setups. It's not possible to use direct project references. because not singular repo and so on. How can a library can be created that that can be consumed?
So I think it would work. So you don't have to have project reference. I think you can just refer to the assembly in any way. So if you just package it into a NuGet package, a private NuGet package thing, then that would be also working, and you would be able to
Not
use that.
not completely, because you need to adjust the config file.
The config file, yes, yeah, definitely. The config file is always the same, so that in the config file you always have to list from which assemblies do you want to use step definitions from. But whether the assembly is a project reference or a NuGet reference or a standard assembly reference, that doesn't matter.
Yes, so assembly needs to be there, and the config file. There are ways that you don't need to do the config file, and if you're interested in, ask a question in the community forum and I post the solutions.
Yeah, but I think it's not a big deal to enter one line into the config file. So
no, but it's more if you set up. It's you need to add the NuGet package and you need to adjust the file. You can.
I mean, it's in a corporate setup. I think that's not a big deal, but yeah, of course.
Good. Next question. The question you observed that in VS you have version displayed against references. Please, if you can share how to set it up, just curious.
Which references we are? Is this? But I don't know what. Maybe who made the question should make some clarification. We don't really know what kind of versions you.
Please add a comment to your question to elaborate more. So the next one is example of refactoring the automation from when a user to when an authenticated user. When would you do that? It seems like very developer centric to do. Would you consult with PO testers to say actually there's a better way to do this? Or is this developer poetic license?
Yeah, I understand the question. So if I just when I was just playing with this, that merging these two into a single step, whether the developers would alone decide that, or they would consult with the product owner. Yeah, that's a good question. I would definitely discuss this with the others for sure, because I think this is a decision that we as a team should make, whether we are separating these two things or merging these two things. Yeah, I think it depends. So yes, definitely from the business readability point of view, it's practically the same. So we are still saying the same thing. It's just a technical difference that now it was in two lines and now then it's a single line. So I don't think that a real approval from the product owner would be required. But of course, having a discussion and including the product owner also to the discussion, I think would be useful. Yeah, it's not a good answer for the question, but I mean, that's what came to my mind. So depends, unfortunately, the answer.
It's most times. So this question. So next question, is BDD a good choice for testing techniques other than acceptance testing? Sometimes it's a bit clunky to maintain the code with very complex logic in BDD style test frameworks.
So I think BDD is designed for this kind of acceptance test. So of course you can use them for whatever you want, but with your own risk. So I'm usually not using BDD for other kinds of tests. So from that perspective, yeah, I think because there is a certain level of additional work that is required to maintain this readable text and separate the readable specification from the actual automation code. And that's not required in many other cases. So if you would think about unit testing, of course you can make scenarios. I've seen people doing that given when I call the method with this parameter, you can do that, but making a C# line doing the same thing is probably much better. Yeah, I think that's so. Yeah, I would primarily use it for that. The complexity is another thing. So that I think the complexity is rather related to the structuring of your code base. So in many cases, what I have seen when I've seen code bases that were over complex, then it turned out that the problem is not that they are complex, but the problem is that they are doing too many things. So not nice, not good enough separation of the different concerns. If you do better separation, then normally your step definitions are in a manageable size. So definitely they are fitting into a screen, or so they shouldn't be a complex code.
Good. So next question is of parallel execution. How can we do parallel run? In hooks, I have to use .current. So because of that, it's giving error related to thread when we do parallel run.
You don't have to. You don't have to. So the point is, and this is what the questioner was asking, I on purpose didn't show that because this is an old practice that we don't want to promote anymore. So right now, if you would like to use, let me just see where I am using that. Maybe in the API one. Oh, it's not open here. So I don't know whether I'm using anywhere the scenario context. Not maybe here. No. So whatever. So earlier in a hook, you might want to need the scenario context, and the old way of doing that was saying scenario context dot current, and that's not working with parallel execution. You shouldn't do that. However, what you should do instead is that you should use the same context injection that that we were showing yesterday. So make a constructor and say that your class requires the scenario context, and SpecFlow will give it to you. So then you just need to save it to a field. I've saved it to the field, and then you can do whatever you want with that in your code, and that works perfectly also in parallel execution setup as well.
Yes. And that's for scenario scoped hooks. For feature and test run hooks, you can get it via parameter on the method.
Yeah. Obviously not the scenario context there, but
not the scenario context, but you can get the feature context in the feature hooks.
Yeah.
And other stuff. So, and you request it simply via parameter of the method.
Yeah.
Good. Next question by Lisa. We're looking at splitting up our SpecFlow projects into multiple projects because having one project means that it takes our tests an exceptionally long time to run. Is there another way to speed up the runtime of the testing without splitting into multiple projects?
That's a tricky question. So normally the runtime depends on how many tests you are running, and maybe you are running too many tests at once. So maybe with the filtering could be an option for you. So you don't necessarily have to run all your tests at once. But if I'm working on the pricing related modules, then I can just filter and just run the pricing related test. So that's for that you wouldn't need to split your I wouldn't split my SpecFlow project. I've just found a client last week who had so many feature files in their project that the build time was a little bit more longer because SpecFlow needs to process all of the feature files. I mean, that could be a reason for that, but for that you really need to have more than 1,000 feature files. That's what we are talking about, which is relatively rare. And even in that case, it was on my machine, it was like an additional 20 seconds or something like that, which is definitely not fast, but it's not a disaster, especially if considering such a big project.
Yeah. One thing, what depending where you have, if you have it in a CI system, what you can do it, you can split it up on multiple agents with a filtering that some parts are executed on one agent, some parts are executed on the second agent. We are doing this in SpecFlow for every unit test runner to get it down because we have the same problem.
Yeah. So, but that's not the reason itself for having multiple projects.
No. That's no. And multiple project doesn't speed up. You make a hard-coded filter.
Yep. Yeah.
So, again, a question about running tests in parallel, about the managing of the driver session for UI tests in order to not have the page crash.
In this application.
That's all I have in the question.
I don't know.
I would
So
say
this application is not prepared for parallel execution because of the shared database. So that shouldn't run. I mean, that's something that if someone is interested, welcome to send a PR for that. In general, I don't know. Just if you see that there is a bug, then just post it to the SpecFlow GitHub as a bug, or ask to the community forum with more details, and then probably we can.
Yes. Generally, if don't get to your question today or still have follow-up questions, go to the community forum and we'll try to answer them there. Good. That's one .NET related one. That's one by Kartik. As part of Living Doc, is there a way to add additional logging to provide more information as to what caused the test to fail? That could be part of a report.
So the Living Doc generator is kind of on purpose or whatever, is not so much focused on the error reporting. That just gives you a summary of what has happened. So therefore, basically the thing that you have here is the error message, and you don't have, for example, the stack trace and things like that. For that, you would need to go back to the build result and see the details there. I don't know. That's my input.
What you can do is we have a dedicated output API. I post the documentation page in the chat, and this the stuff of the output with this API will also get then displayed in your Living Doc.
Yeah. So you can provide some additional details there.
Yes, you can have add links to images, you have plain output, and this gets as best integrated as possible also in the normal test output and in Living Doc.
And it's test runner agnostic, so it doesn't matter which runner you use. It's wherever it's possible, it is working. Yeah. Makes sense.
Good. And now the last question, because we're already out of time. How move the test executed through a data-driven framework with the same columns and change in data to a BDD framework? We have 250 scenarios for each territory and 1,000 for each state. Advice in handling these.
So I don't know. I mean, the same thing. I mean, you will not be happy with that. So same thing that is always said. So that how to eat an elephant bit by bite or bit by bit. So just try to make some small part of that. Try to make some spike or some proof of concept how this could be done. Try to identify some patterns, and maybe for those patterns you can apply some automation how this could be done. I don't have any generic advice for that, unfortunately.
No, I only have a question. Do you really need to test every scenario for each territory in each state?
Yeah, especially this way. So yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Good.
And with that, we are at the end of the masterclass.
Very good. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Don't forget that you will get the things next week or some point.
Slides and the videos.
Yes. And
next week, and not Monday, so more Thursday, Friday, to set up expectations correctly.
Okay, good. So have a good day for everyone, and let's keep in touch.
Bye.
Thank you, Andy. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gasper.